Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Bonnie Perry, and I serve as the Bishop of the Diocese of Michigan. And I'm one of the co-conveners of Bishops United Against Gun Violence. For those of you who may not be familiar, the Bishops United Against Gun Violence is a network of more than 100 bishops working in advocacy, prayer, public witness, pastoral care, all to end the pandemic of gun violence. What I'd like to do right now is to begin us with prayer, and then I'll give you a rundown of how our time will be together. So the Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Holy One, we gather here tonight as people of faith from across our country, remembering who calls us and loves us and creates us. We also gather here remembering who is not here. Madison Baldwin, age 17, Tate Meyer, 16, Hannah St. Juliana, 14, Justin Schilling, 17, all of Oxford, Michigan. Roberta A. Drury, age 32, Margus Morrison, age 52, Andre McNeil, age 53, Aaron Salter, age 55, Geraldine Talley, age 62, Celestine Cheney, age 65, Hayward Patterson, age 67, Catherine Massey, age 72, Pearl Young, age 77, Ruth Whitfield, age 86, all of the Buffalo area. McKenna Lee Elroy, 10. Lila Salazar, 11. Miranda Mathis, 11. Nevaeh Bravo, 10. Jose Manuel Flores Jr., 10. Xavier Lopez, 10. Tess Marie Mata, 10. Rogelio Torres, 10. Elejana Amya Garcia, 9. Elejana Torres, 10. Annabelle Guadalupe Rodriguez, 10. Jackie Cazares, 9. Uzziah Garcia, 10. Jayce Carmelo Luevenos, 10. Mate Rodriguez, 10. Jaila Silaguero, 10. Irma Garcia, 48. Eva Morales, 44. Amory Joe Garza, 10. Alexandria Anaya Rubio, 10. Alethea Ramirez, 10, of Uvalde, Texas. Bart Rainey, 84. Sharon Yeager, 75. And Jane Pounds, 84. Vestavia, Alabama, St. Stephen's. Holy One, these names are more than we can bear. In insanity we can no longer hold. Help us to end this uniquely American way of dying by organizing, partnering, and enacting and embodying our gospel values. In your most blessed name, we pray. Amen. We're here, friends, simply to put our prayers into actions, simply to end gun violence in all of its forms. I so appreciate you taking the time. Much has been happening in our country. Our federal government has passed a piece of sensible gun legislation into law. Our Supreme Court has struck down a sensible piece of gun legislation. What all of this means is that we need to educate ourselves, organize ourselves, and work at the state level to keep people safe. And I believe our time together will help us with this. Rebecca Blatchley of the Episcopal Office of Government Relations will talk to us about this legislation and how we might interact with it. Then we'll be looking at a mode of organizing that several of us have been using in the 4 dioceses in the state of Michigan. Then we'll hear from 2 of our bishops who will be talking about our General Convention resolutions that we can be looking at and that we can enact to pass that will help us. And then, friends, we're going to hear from two of our bishops who serve and lead in dioceses that have been so directly affected by some of the most recent bouts of gun violence. And so I ask Rebecca Blatchley, who is the director of the Episcopal Church of the Office of Government Relations. Rebecca, educate us, friend, help us.
Thank you so much, Bishop Perry, and thank you for the opportunity to speak about what Episcopalians and all people can do to address the crisis of gun violence. I'm so grateful for Bishops United Against Gun Violence for all that you do, and just thank you for the invitation to be here to speak about our work in the Office of Government Relations. We represent the policy positions of the Episcopal Church to the government in Washington, and the Episcopal Church has advocated on gun reform since at least the 1970s, and that advocacy continues today. We have dozens of General Convention and Executive Council resolutions that direct the Church to advocate for reforms. And one way we carry these out is through the Episcopal Public Policy Network, where Episcopalians can take action urging their members of Congress to do something about this crisis. But just to give an example, we have from 2018 a resolution advocating for the study of gun violence as a public health crisis. From the year 2000, we urge we request the removal of handguns and assault weapons. From 1997, we urge legislation on the safe manufacture of domestic handguns. But again, there are just so many resolutions where the Church has spoken powerfully about the need to address this crisis that harms so many every day around our country. Just to give a brief bit of context on gun violence, in 2020, there were more than 45,000 firearm deaths in the US. More than 24,000 of those were suicides, 500 were unintentional deaths, 600 involved law enforcement. Homicides accounted for more than 19,000. These are staggering, breathtaking numbers for us to encounter. But as Bishop Perry mentioned, over the past few weeks, we've had some really encouraging news and also a significant setback on gun violence prevention efforts. So just to start with the good news, on June 25th, President Biden signed into law the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, which is significant legislation, more significant than we've had in 30 years to address gun violence. It was bipartisan, which is also encouraging and significant. The bill funds crisis intervention, including red flag laws to keep guns out of the hands of people who are a danger to themselves and to others. Red flag laws have been shown to work in a number of states, and those allow for temporary court-ordered seizure of someone's weapons if it's shown that they pose an immediate threat to themselves or someone else. They're sometimes referred to as extreme risk protection orders. The bill also authorizes states to use money for to help fund these laws. So states that are able to enact these laws will have funding to help implement them, which is really encouraging and provides an incentive for states. This bipartisan legislation closes what's known as the Boyfriend Loophole. We had been advocating for this to be included in the Violence Against Women Act, which passed earlier this year. It did not make it in, but it's very encouraging that this is now law. This means that intimate partners are also prohibited from acquiring guns if they have domestic violence histories. The legislation requires young people aged 18 to 21 to undergo enhanced background checks. This is the first federal law that makes gun trafficking and straw purchases federal crimes. There's clarity around registration to become a federally licensed gun dealer and run background checks before selling a gun. And there's also funding to address the youth mental health crisis, especially trauma experienced by survivors of gun violence. So there's $3 billion in funding for mental health and school safety programs, and some additional funding for school safety initiatives. There's also investment in anti-violence programs to work directly with people who are most likely to commit gun crimes. So, this legislation isn't everything that General Convention policies would ask for, everything that we had hoped for, but it's something. It's significant. It's a step, and I think it shows that it is possible to have change even at the federal level, even when there's widespread opposition. So it's thanks to the efforts of advocates who've really worked on this for decades. There can be no movement for years and years, sometimes even decades, and then all of a sudden in a few weeks, things can change. So just again, grateful for all of the advocacy that happened on that. And there is, of course, more to do. Turning to the Supreme Court ruling in New York State Rifle and Pistol Association versus Bruin, the court ruled that New York's concealed carry law was unconstitutional. The law required concealed carry applicants to demonstrate that they have a special need for a license beyond just general self-defense. And this was viewed as overstepping. So that is certainly a setback for New York and states that have similar laws. It's a defeat not just because of this particular law, but also I think that the judicial reasoning sort of undermines what kinds of laws will be possible. But even with this ruling, all is not lost. The court affirmed that there are still forms of restrictions that are allowable. For instance, red flag laws are allowable, and no court has ruled that those are unconstitutional. So that is something we can concretely advocate for. So what can you do as advocates, as Episcopalians? Well, first, thank your member of Congress who voted, all of the members of Congress who voted yes for this bill. Members of Congress need to hear a thank you, especially those who are hearing backlash, that they did vote yes in favor of this moving forward. At the federal level, you can join the Episcopal Public Policy Network, where we send weekly action alerts and educate our network members about issues that we're following, what's happening in Congress on federal legislation. You can stay informed. We had an event just on Friday with speakers from the Prevention Institute in a series we call A Closer Look with OGR Gun Violence Prevention, where some evidence-based and proven community-based interventions and approaches were discussed, so we can all learn how to help our communities and what we can do to support them. We can also engage at the state level. There's a tremendous opportunity right now to be engaged in making sure that states have red flag laws, that they have licensing requirements, training requirements for guns. This is something that will need to happen at the state level, that everyone can take action on. And I would just encourage you to do that as well. There was just news that Delaware became the first state to repeal a law that gives firearms dealers immunity from liability for injury caused by their actions. So I would also just say that there's the opportunity to engage in corporate social responsibility as well. We've seen the Episcopal Church lead the way in shareholder engagement, submitting shareholder resolutions like the one that just passed for Sturm Ruger that asked the company to have a human rights assessment as an impact of what the product that they sell. So there's many different opportunities. We hope that you stay informed. And I would also just say that we need many voices at the tables, youth leaders, veterans, people who are impacted, and religious voices are just so critical for politicians and legislators to hear from. So again, grateful for your advocacy. Thanks for the opportunity to share today.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. Friends, I want to bring us now to a partnership that we've developed in the state of Michigan. There are 4 dioceses in Michigan and 3 bishops. And after the Oxford High School shooting, and frankly, friends, in response to the daily gun violence that we were witnessing in Detroit and Pontiac and Flint and Grand Rapids, a group of us began to gather and discuss what we would need to do to end gun violence in Michigan. And it began to form as a both folks from the Episcopal Church and from secular organizations. So we have groups that are doing community organizing and have decided that this is important. We have Giffords, who is a national sensible gun legislation lobby group. And we got together with our Methodist friends, and we began to say, we're going to work with our legislators, because as you can see, working in our states is key. But if our legislators in the state of Michigan were not going to do what we needed them to do, like actually hold hearings and votes for the bills that had been proposed, then we said we were going to begin to explore the possibility of a ballot initiative. And we had press conferences, and suddenly we had 200 people showing up. And then several more press conferences. And the next thing we knew, what we began to plan to do audaciously is we planned to have a lobby day at our state capitol in Lansing. And all of the bishops, the Episcopal bishops from the state of Michigan were at this lobby day. And 2 of the 3 Lutheran bishops joined us, and our colleagues from the Methodist Church, and 150 other people gathered in Lansing for a lobby day and press conference. And over again, the bishops had a meeting with our lieutenant governor. We met with key legislators, and all of our people were having legislative meetings. And people kept saying over and over again, it matters that people of faith have come to be with us and to ask for this. In September, friends, we are planning, after the primaries, before the election, we're planning a 3-day fast with the 3 bishops on the Capitol steps, and a pilgrimage, and another day where I'm going to ask all of our clergy and lay people to come and be there. What I'd like to do is invite my colleague, Bishop Rayford Ray from the Upper Peninsula, Northern Michigan, to talk a bit about his motivations and his context, which I might add is vastly different from mine here in Metro Detroit. Bishop Ray.
Yeah, it certainly is, Bonnie. As Bonnie mentioned, I'm the bishop in the Episcopal Diocese of Northern Michigan. It's the land of the Anishinaabe people. It contains about 29% of the land area of Michigan, but only 3% of its total population. We have only 300,000 people in the Upper Peninsula. Residents are known here as Yoopers, and we are known to be fiercely independent with a strong regional identity. The UP is rural, conservative, and has a strong gun culture. Marquette is the largest city in the UP, which tends to be more progressive. Suicide, for me, suicide is a major public health issue for the Upper Peninsula and for the United States. In fact, since January of 2022, we've had over 17 suicides in Marquette County alone. And I was startled by what was happening here, but I don't think it's that uncommon. 3 of those were students. And if you look at the statistics, suicide is the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. And some startling statistics too is half of all the suicides in the US are by firearms. Nearly 2/3 of all firearms related deaths in the United States are suicides. 85 to 90% of suicide attempts with a firearm are fatal. And 70% of suicides in America are middle-aged white men. So why do firearms matter most? They are the leading method of suicide. They are highly lethal. They are highly accessible in many of our homes, and they are fast and irreversible. So research shows that most people in suicidal crisis don't have an easy access to a lethal suicide method such as guns, will not simply find another way to kill themselves. Secure storage is sensible gun safety law. And secure storage means storing all of your guns unloaded and secured, such as locked with a cable or a trigger lock, or in a gun safe. If we had sensible gun laws that required secure storage of firearms, the number of firearm-related deaths by means of suicide would be reduced substantially. So my hope is to spread awareness that suicidal desperation is real and that we can do something to stop these deaths by enacting sensible gun laws. And that's one of the reasons why I'm involved in ending gun violence in Michigan, and will join the other dioceses of Michigan to make a pilgrimage to our state house in Lansing in September to express the necessity to end gun violence. So I'm going to hand it over now to Prince.
Thank you, Bishop Ray. As Bishop Provisional of Eastern and Western Michigan, I'm engaged in ending gun violence because defending, protecting, and respecting the dignity of children, youth, and adults is my calling. It is our calling as baptized Christians to be peacemakers wherever we are. We can address this moral health issue of gun violence now. 3 young people were gunned down in a Saginaw home earlier this month. Mariano Escareno, Rafael Campos, and Laura Buendia were 24 years old. Firearm injury and death have increased significantly. The University of Michigan notes that firearm death is now the #1 cause of death for youth and children. Eastern and Western Michigan are not immune from this issue. Suicides have increased in rural areas at an alarming rate. As Bishop, I invite you to fast and pray, since this is a spiritual issue. I have the opportunity to not only speak to this moral health issue, but provide cover for clergy and other leaders who are in places where they may be afraid to preach the teachings of Jesus and practice the gospel of peace. One community leader recently put this moment in perspective for me. Ending gun violence is not a policing problem. This is not a rural problem. This is not an urban problem or a small city problem. This is an us problem. We are the change makers. In the words of Alice Walker, we are the ones we've been waiting for. I am going to Lansing, Michigan this September with my colleagues, bishops and other leaders, out of spiritual concern for our moral health. Consider going to your capital and engaging your legislators.
Friends, we have more than 300 congregations between the 4 dioceses. More than 60,000 people. That matters when you show up. Working together as a state collective can really make a difference. Working with other faith groups, Christian and non. This is how we change this, friends. It's how we change the narrative. It is an audacious hope. We do it with steadfast prayer and continuous work. Rayford and Prince, I cannot tell you how thankful I am that we're in this all together. I'd like for one of the other co-conveners of Bishops United, Ian Douglas, to speak for a few minutes about one of the resolutions we've got before General Convention, friends.
Thank you, Bishop Perry. My name is Ian Douglas. I am the Bishop Diocesan of the Episcopal Church in Connecticut. And as Bonnie said, one of the co-conveners of Bishops United Against Gun Violence, have been since we first gathered the network in 2013. Bishop Perry also noted at the opening that part of the work of Bishops United Against Gun Violence is advocacy. We've had advocacy days in Washington, and as you've just heard by Bishop Perry, Bishop Ray, and Bishop Singh, the good advocacy that's happening in Michigan as an example of what can be done at the local state level. As much as we are thankful for the bipartisan Safer Community Act that President Biden has just signed into law, if you followed the development of that act, and if you're committed to gun violence prevention, you know that it didn't go far enough. And that's really the way Washington's working right now, particularly with the strength of the gun lobbies. As much as we're thankful for that good work on the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, work needs to be done at the local state level. And here's where the resources of the Episcopal Church, particularly the great work done by the Washington office and Rebecca Blachley and her team, can really be a wonderful resource for all of us at the diocesan and state levels for our advocacy in our states. It's at our state levels that we can effect real change with respect to red flag laws, licensing, limited use of size of magazines, background checks, automatic weapons as far as the limitation therein, and also secure gun storage. What Resolution B006 at the upcoming General Convention, beginning a week from Friday, seeks to do is, first of all, it's three very simple resolves. The first is it urges at the diocesan level state advocacy for safe and sane gun legislation. It urges local initiative and advocacy at the state and diocesan levels for safe and sane gun legislation. Secondly, it asks that our Washington office, the Office of Government Relations, Rebecca and her team, support our diocesan efforts in state level advocacy against gun violence and other forms of community violence. So it's really asking to release the resources of the Washington office to help us at the state level. This, of course, comes with a price tag. Rebecca and her team have more than enough on their plates already. So this will need some assistance. So we have asked in the resolution for the budget to be voted by convention to allocate $160,000, $80,000 a year for the next 2 years of this third triennium. So B006 will be coming before General Convention, and its title is Investing in State Level Gun Violence Prevention Advocacy. Investing in state level gun violence prevention advocacy. So I have two asks tonight. If your bishop and your deputies are not on this call, please contact them, send them a text, send them, an email, telephone them saying, please support B006. We need that kind of advocacy at our state level. And secondly, start advocating at your state level. Even if this resolution doesn't get through, and if Rebecca and her team can't get additional resources to help us with state advocacy, it doesn't stop us from doing the work, as the bishops in Michigan have witnessed. So B006, one of the 4 resolutions that will be brought to Baltimore by Bishops United Against Gun Violence. And I'll turn it back to Bonnie, who will hand it to Daniel to say a little bit about the other resolutions Bishops United is bringing to General Convention. Thanks, Bonnie.
Thank you, Ian. Bishop Gutiérrez, Daniel, another one of our co-conveners. Would you please walk us through 2 of the other resolutions?
Good evening. I'm Daniel Gutiérrez. I serve as the Bishop of Pennsylvania. Thank you for spending time with us, because these resolutions and your involvement, life-changing. These are 2 where we really put the weight on the scale And when we say we have to do something, we need your support. And these two address critical issues. The first is B003, deals with ghost guns. These things are bad. They're unserialized, they're untraceable. Anyone can build them, make them in their home. They're not subject to any oversight. And we really have to push this resolution and then go forward in our legislatures and in Congress. This was not, it was for some reason overseen in the Brady Act. And it would really at least bring it into the provisions of the Brady Act. And if we could, we ban these things, because there's only one use for them, and we know what they are, what that use is for. So as Ian said, if your bishop is not on the call, please have them support B003. And go ahead and I would, legislators, congressmen, senators, we really have to get these things off the street. These ghost guns are horrible. And so we need your help with B003. B007, as we know, violence is an expression of some of the pain that our siblings in Christ suffer. And this resolution really identified 7 evidence-based strategies for reducing community violence. One is improving the physical environment, where we're nurtured and it's natured all around there. Strengthen anti-violent social norms and peer relationship, engage and support use, reduce substance abuse, mitigate financial stress, and reduce the harmful effects of the justice process, and of course, confront gun violence. And we need a community level change. This is where we actively engage and reflect those things that are important to us. And we're asking that the Office of Governmental Relations work with the White House Community Violence Intervention Collaborative, which is composed of mayors, law enforcement officials, leaders in the community, to use public funding to increase investment in community violence intervention. So B003 and B07 are critical as part of our holistic and overall work as bishops against gun violence, as Christians, as Episcopalians, but as humans. I mean, this is an issue of humanity, as we all know. So thank you for your time, and thank you again for being with us and journeying with us.
Bishop Gutiérrez, Daniel, thank you so very, very much. Friends, I'd like to introduce my colleague, Bishop Sean Rowe. Sean is the Bishop of Western New York, and I'd like for him to offer us some insights into his time in responding to the racist hate that we saw manifested in the shooting in East Buffalo. Sean.
Thank you, Bishop. Good to be with all of you this evening and to be part of Bishops United Against Gun Violence. And a few words about prayer as it frames our work and as it begins to help us to think about what our work is and then to act. As soon as the news of the hate crime at the Tops Market began to break, I reached out to leaders at St. Philip's Episcopal Church on the east side of Buffalo, which is our active and vibrant, historically Black congregation in the Diocese of Western New York, and the childhood home of the presiding bishop. It was clear that first we needed to pray, and because the shooting happened on a Saturday afternoon, I wrote to our partnership diocese that night and included prayers and other resources from Bishops United Against Gun Violence, and announced that on Sunday afternoon we would gather by Zoom to pray the powerful litany in the wake of a mass shooting, which Denise Clark Merriweather, a lay leader at St. Philip's, led with me. And on Monday, I wrote again to the people of the dioceses, calling us not to take the lead in responding to this horrific act of racist violence. At least not take the lead in the way that we often do take the lead, but to follow the lead of the people and the leadership and the community of the east side of Buffalo, and to provide support and solidarity where it is needed and over the long term. That is our long-term commitment. Is particularly in this context is not to take the spotlight. We've got enough performative self-righteousness out there, but to stand in solidarity with Buffalo's Black community and to take the lead of the people who experience every day the devastation of the systemic racism and violence that was on display in the Tops shooter's screed. Nearly a week after the shooting, more than 200 people from across our diocesan partnership gathered in the parking lot of Tops to pray, lament, comfort one another, and commit ourselves to action. We invited Black leaders from the community and from other faith traditions to lead the liturgy. Their voices, their perspectives are what we needed to hear, particularly as a predominantly white church in that region. And we were especially honored to hear from Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie of the National Council of Churches, the first woman to be elected a bishop in the AME Church, and other leaders in the community, pastors, community leaders doing the work. Today, we are continuing to work with the leaders of St. Philip's to contribute to a revitalization of the East Side toward racial reconciliation. We've met with Buffalo's mayor, with city council members to seek their advice and guidance about how we can contribute and have more meetings with civic and community leaders on the horizon. I also have the opportunity to sit on the Racial Equity Roundtable in the city of Buffalo, which is chaired by Justice Rowe, a member of St. Philip's and of the Episcopal Church's Executive Council. And with that group of leaders working to seek ways to support anti-racist work in Buffalo that comes out of our prayer, out of our relationships, out of our standing in solidarity. Our dioceses have been committed to racial reconciliation, as many of yours, as a core priority. And for us, from the core priority from the beginning of our partnership. We didn't expect to be called deeper into this work in this horrific way. But now that it's happened, we're in this work for the long haul. And our prayer strengthens us for the work of standing in solidarity and frames our action with those who have paid the price for the unholy alliance of racism and gun violence. Thank you for the opportunity this evening. Thank you, Bishop Perry.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sean. Friends, we have Bishop Glenda Curry of the Diocese of Alabama. And all of you are surely aware of the shooting at St. Stephen's in Bishop Curry's diocese. And Glenda, I wonder if you might just speak with us a little bit of the prayer in the midst of that.
I'd be glad to. Thank you, Bishop Perry and everybody. As I came on into the rooms and I saw some of the people who had responded to me, I wanted to thank them outright for their prayers. We're now 11 days past what happened and only beginning to, I guess, get through the first layer of grief and pain and shock enough that we're starting to wake up a little bit and ask ourselves what's next. We have a lot to manage, I think, in terms of healing, and it will take a long time. But I wanted to tell you just a little bit about what happened that night when I got the call. I live about 5 minutes from the church, from St. Stephen's, and it was the first church I attended in Birmingham when I got here in 1987. So I knew the people, I knew all three of the people who died. I knew most of the people that were in the room, pretty well over the years. They know me more as a priest than as a bishop, because I think yesterday was the second anniversary of my consecration. So I'm still a baby. But within probably 10 minutes or 15 minutes, I heard from Ian. I heard from the presiding bishop's office offering me resources for prayer. They wanted to give me the litany, that one of the litanies that Sean just mentioned. And I didn't know why at that point. I didn't know what I was going to do with them, honestly, but I was grateful. And so after about 2.5 hours on the street, and Bishop Pryor was with me, and I noticed that he's on this call as well. So hop in there, Brian, if you want. But we were able to get into an adjacent building. And what we noticed while we were on the street is that across the street in a parking lot of the Publix, people had started to gather to pray, and probably members of maybe 7 or 8 Episcopal churches in the Birmingham area were over there. Clergy with their collars on were over there. All kinds of people gathered and blocked and took over the Publix parking lot while we were walled off from the church. And when we finally got into the annex, everybody came in, and they didn't want anything other than to pray together. They wanted to stand there and pray. And so my instinct said we would just do that. And so that's what we did. And I announced to them that we would have a service somewhere in the area the next morning. And we had a service at St. Luke's Episcopal Church, and we had 700 or 800 people online, and we had about 800 show up. And that came from just mostly word of mouth. It was a groundswell of people praying from all denominations, all faiths, all across Birmingham and the state. And then, of course, we heard from people all over the world. And it was the litany that Sean just mentioned that we prayed. And it was so powerful. People who I saw today in the clergy meeting just wanted to talk about how important that was, to recognize ourselves as people of prayer in the midst of a tragedy before we do anything else. And honestly, if we hadn't done that, I'm not sure what I would have done as a bishop, because it was so clear to me it was God leading us. And so I'm so grateful to the people that sent me the litanies and the resources, even though I didn't have a clue what I was going to do with them. Because in the midst of it all, that is what has sustained us and the people of St. Stephen's. And we've gotten through those funerals, and now at the end of next week, we will reclaim the space that where the deaths happened, and try to help them get back on their feet using their entire physical plant. So you wouldn't think a bishop would forget that we're people of prayer. But in the midst of tragedy, I'm so grateful to have been reminded, and I highly recommend our litanies. I didn't use all of them, but I sure used a lot of them. So, and I'm grateful to all of you, because many of you on this call have sent me notice that you're praying.
Thank you, Glenda. Friends, we have time for a few questions. If we're going to do it with Zoom hand raises, so and that's going to be in your reaction. you can, if you've got down at the bottom, if it says reactions plus, if you hit that, 2.5 years into the pandemic, I know you can do it. We'll call on you and see what we can do. Celeste, you're gonna have to get unmuted. And so my technical team is gonna work on that.
You should be able to unmute, Celeste.
Yeah, I know. I've clicked it, but it's...
There you go. We can hear you.
Okay, it just took a little while. I didn't think I'd be first. This is a real gift to have the experience that many of you have sadly lived through. And what came out of that, I think, would be very helpful. And that is maybe, I hate to get so organized about this, but maybe a list and some bullet points, because I've taken notes and I don't know if we're going to be able to read them in a few days, but just an outline, a 10,000 foot view of what you're saying, the prayers, the services, the contact with each other in the Diocese of El Camino Real, where a few of us on this call tonight are from. It varies greatly geographically. And it would be wonderful to have some 10,000 foot view experiences on paper or on email that we can take a look at to develop what is appropriate for us in our area.
So Celeste, I'd be happy to refer you to the Bishops United Against Gun Violence website, where the resource base there is quite robust and is always updated, with the good assistance of our friends at Canticle Communications. That's a good place to start.
Excellent, Bishop
and
Douglas,
also,
thank you.
And not in the land of shame and blame, but I would invite you and all of us to be careful of our language. I know that I no longer use the expression bullet points, but rather dot points. So, and that mindfulness is part of this cultural change that we're trying to be about. So there's an invitation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mary Haggerty.
Hi, thank you all so much. What I hear a lot is the importance of advocacy. And I'm glad to hear that, because I think it's the statistics and the facts show that changing our laws will lessen the deaths. I mean, that's just plain cold, hard facts. My question as a priest in the church is sometimes the disconnect between that concept of advocacy and our faith. And so how to talk to communities about the fact that our faith isn't just about coming to the table on Sunday, but we have to be engaged, or it is appropriate, I guess is what I want to say, to be engaged in legislative work, that also is a faith statement. I feel like we need more education on that. Do you have any resources or ideas?
Ian, do we have anything about that? If not, we can produce something, Mary.
And that is exactly why we need to pass B006.
Boom.
That's the intent behind B006, to develop those exact resources so that, and they can be also developed uniquely for each state so as to kind of be a nuanced advocacy position. So yes, and once again, we commend our general website. And of course, if you're not part of the Rebecca Blatchley's and her office's regular ongoing update for the Advocacy Network, that is one of the best resources in the Episcopal Church. So
thank you. Cindy Corner, Diocese of Michigan.
I'm just wondering, as part of End Gun Violence Michigan, whether or not we have reached out to local police agencies. I did visit with a friend this afternoon who is a police officer in a nearby state, and ran our 3, safe gun, red flag laws and something else. And I said, do you think police departments would support that? And he thought they would. Have we either at the national level or local level reached out? I don't know. I know laws from states to states differ as to what they can endorse and not endorse. But I would think if they're in favor of it, it would be helpful.
I know that we have. I know in Detroit with Pastor Barry Randolph's at Church of the Messiah's Silence and Violence March, I was sitting up front with almost all police officers. So I know that there is a strong connection. And friends, I would invite all of you to reach out, because the more partners we have on this, the better.
And another opportunity to participate with your local police officers is just go to your local police department and ask if they have any gun locks. They will generally have free gun locks that you can, as priests, that you can have, bring to your parish and say, anyone who is a firearm owner in our parish who does not lock your guns, here are free locks provided by your local police department. We're doing that here in Connecticut, and it's amazing the relationships you can create just going in and asking for gun locks.
Fabulous. Thank you, Ian. Karen Nielsen?
Good evening. Thank you for putting this together. I think it's wonderful. I am living in Fort Collins, Colorado, but I lived a majority of my life in Wyoming. So I'm from the wild, wild west. So I don't have to tell you the attitude about guns here. On April 29th, I also retired as a mental health professional. After 43 years, I was either a school social worker or a mental health professional for that length of time. So I'm all about the mental health portion of stopping gun violence. Here is one of my issues, though, is that we are going to offer appropriately mental health services for adults, and sometimes that's too late. The adults that are engaged in violence, I would be very comfortable to guess also had trauma in their childhood or inappropriate parenting or cognitive disabilities. So if we're going to offer mental health, what I would highly suggest is that when we talk about mental health, we talk about childhood services. We talk about parenting services. We talk about support for single parents, both mother and father, because that is difficult. I think that if we start dealing with mental health issues when a person is 5 rather than 25, I think we're going to get a lot further down the road. Absolutely. As far as stopping violence. So that is my comment. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you. And do remember, friends, though, that the level of mental health issues in the United States is very much the same as the level of mental health issues across the world. We just happen to have access to many, many more guns. It's important. And we have another causation that is causing. So we need to work on both levels. And thank you so much, Karen. Skylar?
Yes, good evening. I think that advocacy is incredibly important. I don't want to take away from that at all. Nope. But I think that we've discussed this evening that advocacy falls short. And so I wonder, how are we going to organize as a denomination to engage in civil disobedience? How are we going to engage in the path of Christ and Dr. King to actually follow through on the things that we say, that we believe with our actions? I want to do this with peaceful intention, but until we get into the face of the powers that be, they will not provide change. And they've seen that especially in recent weeks. Thank you.
Thank you, Skylar. And friends, this is the beginning, right? There are lots of different ways, and many of us have different charisms. We need to hear God's call. We're going to do 2 more questions and then we'll be done. William?
Thank you. You mentioned partnerships with Methodists and Lutherans. As a Presbyterian sitting in here with gratitude, thank you so much. Is the Presbyterian Church USA involved in any national or state partnerships with the Episcopal Church?
There is an absolutely amazing woman in Texas, Dina. I'm not going to come up with her last name. She is ordained. Her call is to working to end gun violence. And she's in Dallas, Dina. And Kurt, if you followed back up with me, I could get you her name. She's doing amazing work, and she's part of a national gathering of a fairly evangelical group that is working on this issue. Super interesting. And so, yes, those folks are there, and she is absolutely brilliant. Catherine, you're my last question. And if for other folks, I know Mary also had a question. If you put them into the chat, we will record them. We will get back to you. You can follow up with Bishops United Against Gun Violence. There's also on Facebook, Episcopalians United Against Gun Violence. And come find us at General Convention. We'll be the sad people just hanging out in the House of Bishops because it's not the big convention, but we're doing that to be safe. And there we go. I'm sorry, Catherine, tell me your question.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is in conjunction with what Karen was speaking with. A woman came up to me less than a week ago and said that her son, without her knowing it, he's in his early 20s, went to a concealed weapons training. It's a day-long training or something. And she was mortified. One, they're not allowed in her house or anything. But second of all, he has mental illness. And she's like, what do I do? I couldn't even answer her because you don't think of it at that step. You think of it as a purchase, at a purchase point.
So that's where the red flag laws are going to come in.
Okay.
Right, because that's when you can say someone can petition to have another person's ability to have a firearm taken from them on the grounds that they are a danger to themselves or to someone else. It's a super important law, and and the states that have them are seeing a decrease in violence. We've got to work for it. And the other thing is she needs to just lock everything up.
She doesn't allow them in her house.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's where we are, but it's friends. It is hard. And we're gonna close with prayer with Bishop Curry. But what I want to say to you all, again, audacious hope, steadfast prayer, and continuous work. What's God calling you to do in this moment with the gifts God has given you? We can do this. People's lives depend on it. Thank you so very much for coming. Bishop Curry.
The Lord be with you.
Also with you.
Let us pray. Oh God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us and unite us in bonds of love, and work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time all nations and races may serve you in harmony around your heavenly throne. Through Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Amen. Friends, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Be well, be safe.
Thank you, Bonnie.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you, Ian, Rayford and Prince, Sean, Glenda,
Rebecca, all your
Sam,
good work. Thank you.
Mechanical Communication, thank you. Rebecca Blatchley, thank you. Dina, our Spanish translator, thank you, friend.